It is a mock draft Monday here on Rich Sports Talk. Ladies and gentlemen, we have finally made it. Our first 7-rounder for the New York Jets. They are officially on the clock. Hello, everyone, and welcome. If you're new to the channel, make sure you give us a like. Hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any of our latest content. Also, check our community page for all these new polls that we'll be having out for you. But again, if you want to make sure that your comment is read, and I know you guys have a lot of various opinions, make sure to make a donation using that super chat feature so we can also grow the channel and deepen our content. Now, again, I've told you I do this all the time, 7-round mock drafts, but I wait until after the dust is settled free agency. We get a bit of a broader picture. So the New York Jets, of course, have a ton of needs going into the draft. And again, let me know in the comments what you personally think their biggest needs are, because again, I love to hear from you guys and what you're feeling. And I know I've already gotten the sense from Jet fans. Tight end is a big issue. Offensive line is a big issue. Defensive tackle, heck, even quarterback to an extent. We're going to talk all about that today. We'll have some fun. We'll have some trades, but the Jets will have some key decisions. And again, it's a whole new regime, a whole new ball game, but the Jets will be on the clock, of course, with the sorry, just lost track of thoughts. Let me get back on the train back on track a little bit. The Jets are officially on the clock with the 7th overall pick. So what will the New York Jets do? Well, the New York Jets are officially clock. And with the 7th pick in the 2025 NFL Draft, I have the New York Jets selecting Armand Membou, offensive tackle, Missouri. Look, I know this will be a hot button debate with Jet fans, whether to go offensive line at pick number 7 or to go with tight end. I know Tyler Warren is highly mocked here at this point. And I understand that some people will look at the opposite. They'll do the Missy Elliott, they'll flip it and reverse it. They'll go tight end at 7 and offensive tackle at 42. My thought process is this. I look at what the Lions built. They built a great offensive line. Armand Membou is a really good right tackle. He's a plug-and-play right tackle. I think he's one of the best run blockers in this draft, and he brings some of the Jets' need, a road grader on that right side of the line. I'll stick to a couple quick bullet points. Look, AVT, love AVT, but he's had 2 long-term injuries. He's had 2 lower body injuries that have cost him seasons. I'm not sure what this new regime thinks of him long-term. Maybe they don't view him as a long-term prospect at right guard. So this helps solidify him potentially leaving next year. And I get the argument. Well, you can't use 2 draft picks back-to-back first round on offensive linemen. You know what the best Jets offensive line was in recent memory? Oh, yeah, that was the one where they took not 1, but 2 players in the first round of the offensive line. You might have heard them, DeBrickashaw Ferguson and Nick Mangold. I think that worked out pretty well. And I get the argument. They need playmakers. But looking at how this offense has been built, how they haven't gone out and gotten a lot of skill positions, how they've tried to upgrade the offensive line, I think this is a team that's going to want to run the football and control the clock, and you do that with great offensive line play. Yes, Tyler Warren helps this team out in the run game as well, but you look at how I really believe this team wants to be built. They want to build a great foundation with a great offensive line. The Lions, I know, can throw the ball over the yard, but what is their bread and butter? It's running the football, and they do it behind a great pair of tackles, and the Jets have a chance to get a good dynamic duo at the position. So now the Jets have addressed the offensive line in the first round. We are moving into round number 2, and that would be pick number 42. So with the Jets on the clock, who do they take in the second round? Well, I have the Jets addressing the tight end position. Mason Taylor, tight end out of LSU. Look, I get that there's a lot of worry about not taking a tight end at 7, but this is an incredibly deep tight end class. I also could see a scenario where the Jets move up from 42 to get a tight end that potentially fell. You can get talented tight ends on day 2 of the draft. Sam Laporta, George Kittle are great examples. And with such a deep tight end class, I really believe the Jets should take advantage of it. and they will look to do it here in round number 2. Could this be a position for a wide receiver? Could they go interior defensive line potentially here too? I think all of those are possibilities, but Mason Taylor to me is a plug-and-play tight end. He's a good blocker, 250 pounds, can catch the football, was the go-to guy on this LSU team when they needed a conversion, reliable tight end, maybe not as explosive as a Tyler Warren, but a very good starter, consistent player, and a plug-and-play guy from day one. So the Jets in the first 2 picks have addressed the offensive line, and they have addressed the offensive tackle position and the tight end position. So again, they address O-line with pick number 7, 42. They go with Mason Taylor. So what are they going to do? They have the pick in the 3rd round. Wait a minute, or do they? I have the Jets making a trade. Yes, I have them trading up from the 3rd round. I have them moving to pick number 60 with the Detroit Lions. Aaron Glenn, of course, worked there, has a bit of a relationship. Detroit wants to get a couple picks. So I have the Jets moving up 13 spots. They will send the 73rd pick in the draft and their 5th rounder, which is 145, to move up to pick number 60. And at pick number 60, I have the New York Jets selecting. I have them going with Jalen Milroe, the quarterback of Alabama. Look, I know this will be a polarizing pick, but here's the reason I have the Jets trading up for him. In a perfect world, I think the Jets would love to take him at 73. I think a lot of teams are going to hope that Milroe falls to round 3, take him to sit behind and develop. And I just look at the teams in front of the Jets at 73. There's a couple teams that I think could be in the Jalen Milroe market or willing to take that dart throw. You look, he's an unbelievably talented individual, physically gifted. You look at the quarterbacks the Jets have been building around right now with Justin Fields, hyper athletic quarterbacks. And with Justin Fields, there could be a way to let Milroe sit for maybe even 2 years. I just have this feeling that if you really like a guy and you believe he has the most upside, and look, of this class, you can make the case Jalen Milroe is the biggest polarizing prospect. He has arguably the highest ceiling of any quarterback, but he also has the lowest floor. I think the Jets take a risk here. They move up. They ensure that they get Milroe. They don't want to play the game and hoping he falls to 73. Yes, it is a 2nd-round pick. Yes, the Jets traded a 5th-round pick to move up. But in the grand scheme of things, if they somehow come away with their franchise quarterback here, it doesn't matter in the grand scheme of things. I think they will fall in love with the athleticism Milroe brings. And when you look at the AFC, when you look at the really elite quarterbacks, they are incredibly talented. You need to take a swing here, and you hope that Jalen Milroe's upside gives you someone that can compete. But if it doesn't work out, it's not going to kill your franchise by submitting a 5th-round pick to move up to get him. You take a shot. If it works, great. If it doesn't, it's not going to kill you. So now the Jets are officially done on day 2. They move up for Jalen Milroe with the 60th pick. So the big question is now, what do the Jets do on day 3? Because they've really done a good job attacking the offensive side of the football. The question is, do they continue to attack the offensive side or the defensive side? Well, I have the Jets with their 4th-round pick going with Nick Nash, the wide receiver out of San Jose State. There's a couple of reasons why I think he will be here. Because, yes, he was an incredibly productive receiver in college, 1,400 yards, very good possession receiver. But here's the thing. They are looking for traits. And while he does have the great size of an outside receiver, 6'2", 204 pounds, ran a 4.57 40, a bit on the slower side, not really a burner, and also an older prospect. He's going to be 24 years old. He's a 6th-year senior. And I know some people are already cringing when I say that, but I still think this is a guy that can come in, be a very productive 3, maybe even by the end of the season, number 2, brings you a different flavor of receiver. He's a very good possession receiver. He's not going to stretch the field for you. He's not going to burn defensive backs. But if you need someone in the red zone to do a jump ball, he's incredible above the rim, explosive leaper. When he gets his hand on the ball, he's not dropping. Had 16 touchdowns last year. gives the Jets a nice weapon and a different flavor of wide receiver. You look at this receiving room right now, you have a lot of smaller bodies in there. Garrett Wilson's great, but smaller body. They need a big-bodied receiver on the outside. Nash brings them a new element that they don't really have, and again, gives them a big body on the outside that can be incredible value. And look, I think the age and the 40 time is going to push him into day 3, where the Jets can get a very nice value on a receiver. Next, I have the Jets going with Nazir Stackhouse, the defensive tackle out of Georgia. The Jets need beef on the defensive line. That is clear. And Stackhouse brings that. He's 327 pounds. He is hard to move. He's very good at instinctive reading the run blocks. He does have some trouble getting off blocks. He's not going to bring you much bang in the pass rush game. He has trouble getting up the field. But in terms of being an anchor and being a stalwart defensive tackle where you're not going to move him and he clogs up running lanes, he is someone that the Jets need in this room. I do think the guys that they've brought in have a little bit more of a pass rush element to them, where Stackhouse, he's never really going to be a 3-down defensive tackle. But if you need him on first or second down in running situations, he brings someone that will allow Quinnen Williams a little bit more space to operate. He basically is a 325-pound anchor in the middle of the defense. And I think at this point would bring good value and brings, like I said, with Nash a little bit, we're looking for different flavors. We're looking for different things to come into the room and different elements to build up this roster. I think that we've seen that this team is invested in certain positions and certain skill sets. And Stackhouse has a nice set of skills that the Jets, let's be honest, really lacked last year. The Jets could not stop the run. They have 2 linebackers in Quincy and Sherwood, who I love, but again, they're on the underside. You need big bodies, guys that are hard to move, and Stackhouse here brings an incredible value to the Jets. So the Jets now have 2 picks in round 6 to wrap up this draft. My first pick is R.J. Minkins, the safety out of Clemson. I talked about in my last mock draft. Versatile, can play the safety position. I think could push to even be a starter at some point, but he does have a lot of versatility. He has a good nose for the ball. He can line up all over the field. He can line up in the deep. He can line up in the slot. He is a versatile chess piece and a fun defensive back that I think Aaron Glenn's going to love to work with, because he can put him out there with 3 deep safeties. He can put him out there maybe as a corner. And at this point in the draft, you're looking at guys that bring value. And with Minkins, not only are you getting a guy that you're hoping could be an eventual starter, but he's a good depth piece. He can play a little bit of corner if you need to. Maybe that helps you save a roster spot on game day. So with Minkins here, I think this is a good pick. He's someone the Jets have had a lot of interest in these early prospect meetings, and he's one of these players that if his name is called, I will not be surprised by the Jets. And look, my last pick is going to be an interesting. I have to give this one out to Dom C for turning me on to this guy, watching a lot more of his tapes. It's Jackson Hawes, the tight end out of Georgia Tech. This guy brings something to the room that the Jets don't have. He's not a great pass catcher, but he is a freaking hammer. He's a 260-pound battering ram. And with how much I think the Jets are going to want to run the football, he will bring a nice dynamic to this tight end room. You've already added a receiving tight end. You bring in Mason Taylor, who I think is a nice mix of both, but you bring in Haas here. He can be someone that can compete for the tight end spot. And this is a team that I wouldn't be shocked that maybe they carry 4 tight ends and only 5 receivers on game day. He allows you someone that you can run behind. He was great in that option opposite for Georgia Tech. I really like this. And look, this is a little bit selfish of me because, again, I don't know if this is a guy that Jets are really interested in, but this is someone that I could see improves the offensive line because you get a hammer on the offensive line, great in early situations, and maybe you could even use him as a bit of a fullback, move into the backfield. I know they tried that with Jeremy Ruckert at times last year. This could be a hybrid fullback tight end potentially. And look, he's not going to win many races. He's not a fast tight end. He's not going to do a lot on the stat sheet potentially. But this is someone where if the Jets need a crucial 3rd and 2 conversion, he could be a key element in helping this roster. So that is it. Our first 7-rounder is in the books, and we will have plenty more here on Rich Sports Talk. And I know you're going to want to hear them again. Use that super chat feature, jump to the front of the line. Again, the Jets go heavy offense. The first 4 rounds of this draft rounded out with defense on day 3, which again is a trend I think we see a lot in the NFL. They address most of their positions. I understand that there's some people that'll be a little frustrated with the first pick with Menbu, but overall, I think if you look at the theme of the draft that I went with, this was a lot about adding size, beef, and adding a toughness to this team. I looked at guys that bring a nasty attitude, guys that are going to help in the run game, guys that are going to help open up the running ability of this team, and also guys that add elements to this team, whether it's size on the outside, whether it's beef on the interior of the defensive line, whether it's a guy who can help block in the running game. I brought different flavors to the Jets to help build out this roster because I do think that the Jets have added some nice pieces in free agency. But I do think that some areas of this roster are still lacking. Last year, this team got run over. And as much as I love Quincy and as much as I love Jamie and Sherwood, it was clear that an element of size was needed to improve this run defense because this run defense last year was not good. Now, they also need to improve the interior of the defensive line. I know that that is clearly a priority for this team, but I know the biggest hot take out of this will be not taking Tyler Warren at 7. And before I get to your comments, because I see them, again, super chat to jump to the front of the line, I want to give you my 2 cents on Tyler Warren because I do think it is very important because when I don't have him there, I think a lot of people assume that I do not like him as a prospect. I believe he's one of the top 10 players in this draft. That is clear. Now, do I feel comfortable taking him at 7? If the Jets decide to do that, I wouldn't hate it. Personally, I'd rather try to get more assets for next year, but I understand it. I think the hard part with Jet fans, and I talked a little bit about with Dano Jets on his channel on Friday night. If you haven't checked out the video, go check that out. We talked for an hour about the draft specifically and Armand Menbu. If you want more deep insight, go check out his channel for that. My biggest thing was it almost feels like the Jet fan, and you can tell me if I'm wrong in the comments, it feels like there's a bit of FOMO for what happened last year with Brock Bowers. Now, again, I've gotten in many debates on this channel last year about offensive tackle versus tight end. And ultimately, despite how good Bowers is, the Jets made the right decision in investing in a left tackle who I believe is going to be a left tackle for this team for a long time. Now, I do think that the offensive line isn't necessarily as drastically in need as it was last year. But the other thing, too, is the Jets had Morgan Moses last year. They added John Simpson last year, and both of those moves worked out very well. The thing I look at this offensive line is I don't worry about Tippmann, and I don't really worry about Olu. I don't necessarily worry about John Simpson, but the right side of this line concerns me. And when I look at the right tackle position, yes, they get invested in a tackle who's 28, 1 year, had 60 starts at right tackle. But he's also had a bit of a shaky career, and it didn't work out well with the Patriots last year. And if he gets injured, we're an injury away from having Max Mitchell be this team's right tackle. We're an injury away from having Carter Warren be this team's right tackle. And the other big thing in the room that I think we have to keep in mind is AVT. Because AVT played very well last year. But we also have to remember something very important about him. AVT had 2 season-ending injuries the year before. 2 his Achilles. 2 very graphic lower body injuries. 2 injuries that I do think have hampered his career. And as much as I love AVT, and as great as he played last year, if he gets another injury this year, the Jets are going to have to likely move on from AVT. Because think of it this way. He's going to be 28. This is a whole new regime. This regime has nothing invested in AVT. They didn't draft him. They didn't trade up for him. I know as a fan base, we've invested in him. But when you look at this regime, they haven't. And maybe they look at it and go this way. And this is in my scenario, how I think the Jets are imagining it. Now, I could be wrong. But I think they look at it goes, if we draft Menbu, and we know we have our left tackle, we have our right tackle set, we know Tippmann either as a center interior offensive lineman is good, and I do think they try to extend John Simpson. It's a lot easier to try to find a guard and convert a tackle into a guard next offseason than try to figure out replacing both right tackle and right guard potentially if they don't address the right tackle. I do think they will address the tackle position in this draft. The question is where. 42, I don't feel as comfortable because I think when I look at the value, I still think you get a better valuable tight end at that point than a tackle. But when people say, like, oh, they got to take Tyler Warren, I think that Tyler Warren is a very good tight end. I think he's a better blocker than Brock Bowers, but Brock Bowers was a different type of prospect. And you look last year, he didn't go until the middle of the first round in a much more talented draft. Like, and now all of a sudden the Jets are going to take a tight end at 7. To me, if they love the guy and they feel he's going to be a great player, you have to take it. But here's what I would say with Tyler Warren. If you feel that Tyler Warren is going to be a Pro Bowl tight end, a multiple time tight end, then make the pick. But if you're taking someone in the top 10 just to hope that they're good and they're solid, when you're taking someone in the top 10, you're banking on special. And I think Tyler Warren can be a very good tight end in this league for a long time. But is he a perennial Pro Bowler? We will find out. All right, let's get to some of your comments and reactions. Super chat from Scott Foster. I like how the draft is starting. Maybe I spoke too soon. I'm guessing the quarterback pick, Scott. For sure, agree with the big body receiver. I think you're going to see the Jets. If I had to say one skill set that the Jets are going to invest in this draft is going to be size, whether it be weight on the defensive line, whether it be weight on the offensive line, but also size. I think size is going to be a big factor because, like I've mentioned in this video, I think the Jets are going to want to run the ball, and run the ball more. And if you want to do that, you need big bodies on the outside. And I also think getting bigger bodies on the outside helps Garrett Wilson because Garrett Wilson loves working in that slot. He's very agile in that slot position. So with that, I do think that the Jets are going to look for bigger body receivers, guys that can block, guys that can really set the edge. And maybe they're not burners, but they're guys that are, if you get the ball near them, they're going to catch it. And when I look at this draft, there are some intriguing options in bigger body receivers later in this draft. Now, I think Ted McMillan at 7 might be a bit of a stretch. I think if you could trade back a couple spots and get him maybe in the early teens, same with Tyler Warren. And that's the other thing, too. And I brought this up on Dane's show. I see a scenario where I could see the Jets trading back a couple spots and still being able to draft Tyler Warren. I really don't think outside of the Jets, when I looked at the board, the only team that I really think would be interested in Warren would be the Colts at 14. And it's almost like the same thing with the Jets. It's Bowers FOMO that they weren't able to get that done. But the thing with Membu is I feel like he is a safe pick at 7. I think that he is a plug-and-play right tackle. And there are some very intriguing options at right tackle later in this draft. But this is a draft, and I talked a lot with Dom C about this, and I agree. Membu, to me, is also a guy that fits this bill, too. He probably would be better at guard than tackle, but of all the tackles, he seems like the one that could stay on the outside the most. There's a lot of intriguing tackle prospects, but they would be better suited because of their length or their foot speed to kick inside the guard. And when I look at the guys in round 2, round 3, I see a lot more of that, or I see guys that maybe aren't what the Jets are looking for. One of my favorite tackle prospects was Lunt from UConn. But with him, he's a guy that is more around 300 pounds, probably a better pass blocker than a run blocker, and he fits a little bit more in a zone blocking scheme. He's not going to be someone that's really a road grading right tackle, and I think the Jets are kind of get that opposite effect of Olu. I think Olu's a fine run blocker, but he's clearly a better pass blocker. And it was kind of a nice yin and yang when Moses was healthy because you had Moses who was more that road grading right tackle, which worked really well. So I know also people have mentioned kicking AVT out to right tackle. It doesn't seem like that's going to be planned. Look, I would keep it inside at guard. I think he's had too many lower body injuries to move out to right tackle, and that's the position he's gotten injured at. So I also think at this point he doesn't want to move. And I think the big thing too is you got to keep him where he's comfortable. I would have liked to seen Higgins other than the quarterback, but who knows if he will even be available. Look, I know the quarterback's going to be polarizing, Scott. I get this feeling that when I look at the Jets right now, I think the Jets are targeting the third round for a quarterback. Now, I do also believe that the Jets, if they don't love a quarterback in this draft, they're not going to just burn capital. If anything, maybe they try to get capital for next year's draft. I could see that being a scenario. The problem is, I think every other team is going to try to be doing that. But I think if you were to ask me, like, what are the quarterbacks to keep an eye on for the Jets? I would say Kyle McCord out of Syracuse, and I think Jalen Milroe. Now, I think McCord reminds me a little bit of what you got in Jared Goff. I think he's more of a accuracy passer. Again, you look at the records he set. He doesn't have the biggest arm. I think he's got good enough mobility where I could see him being a nice game manager. I know the Jets have met with him multiple times. Milroe, to me, is still a fascinating player. And I'm not saying I don't think Kyle McCord can be a good quarterback. I think he can work in the NFL. But my thing is, and I think the way teams are thinking, if you are in the AFC especially, you just look at the quarterbacks that are ahead of you. And there are a ton of not just good, but we're talking about all-time talents. Like, just think about the quarterbacks you have to go through. You have to go through Josh Allen. You have to go through Joe Burrow. You have to go through Lamar Jackson. You have to go through Patrick Mahomes. You have to go through Justin Herbert. And I'm not even mentioning some of the, the lower tier ones too, like CJ Stroud, I would put in that category. But even you got talented guys like Tua that were. We don't know what Drake May could be. He could be someone really good. There's a lot of great quarterbacks in the AFC. And if I'm going to take a gamble on a quarterback, I think if you're especially in the AFC, you got to go on the upside. Yes, you worry about the floor, but you need to take a swing. And I think that's part of the reason and the logic why the Jets, when they had the number 2 pick and they lost on Trevor Lawrence, I think that's why they went with Zach Wilson, because they looked at it and they said, if any of these guys could get closest to their ceiling, or who has the highest ceiling, or who has the highest ceiling even compared to Sam Darnold, they felt in that building that it was Zach Wilson, that if everything went right, Zach Wilson would be the most talented of the group. And when you look at the gifts Zach Wilson had, you could have made that argument. The problem came from, well, what's the floor? Well, does he play within a script? Does he listen to instructions? Is he coachable? Does he work within a scheme? What's his confidence like? What's his durability like? And for Zach Wilson, it just wasn't a great fit. And the problem was, when he doesn't live up to those expectations, it makes your organization do desperate things. Now, with Jalen Milroe, I'm more comfortable moving in my scenario, a day 3 pick. And again, I know you want to have your picks to ensure that I get him in the late second round, because I look at the skill set. He is an incredible athlete. He has a lot to bring to the table. He reminds me a lot of Anthony Richardson. The problem is, like Anthony Richardson, he needs time to develop. He needs time to sit. And with the Jets and with this new regime and with this new timetable and with Justin Fields, I think you have a chance to really sit and develop him. And if you sit with him and develop him for a year, and you're this organization, you're this coaching staff, and you see it's not progressing the way you would like, you know what? You go and draft another quarterback, because the franchise isn't going to fold when you don't hit on the quarterback in the late in the second round. It folds when you draft the quarterback in the second round, when you could have drafted Patrick Mahomes in one of those drafts. It folds when you miss out on the high-end quarterbacks. And I understand when I look at the situation, and again, I agree with Scott. I'm all in for Membu at 7 as well. And with Michael, I also have to agree with you. I think a tight end in the top 10 is a bit rich. And one of the big things I noticed, and people saying, oh, you can't draft tackles, or like, oh, it doesn't make sense to. The two things I come back to with the tackles, because people say, why would you take tackles in the first round back-to-back drafts? Number one, the best Jets offensive line we've had in recent memory was built in one draft. It was Nick Mangold and it was D'Brickashaw Ferguson. They drafted not one, but two offensive linemen in that first round, and it worked. I also saw a great statistic, too, where they looked at right tackles on the teams that were competing in the playoffs. Most of the teams, more than half, drafted their right tackle in the first round. And when you looked at a lot of them, I think only one or two teams hadn't drafted a right tackle within the top 3 rounds. And I understand the worry about tight end. But when I look at the history of the draft and when I look at how the draft is played out and the statistics, I am more likely to find a really talented and dynamic tight end on day 2 of the draft than an offensive lineman. I am more likely to find a good playmaker later in the draft or further back than an offensive tackle. Like I already mentioned the Lions earlier. Sam Laporta is a great tight end. They drafted him in the second round. George Kill's a great tight end. They drafted him in the third round. Rob Gronkowski, second round. Like you don't need to draft a tight end in the first round. Brock Bowers was unique because Brock Bowers was almost more of a receiver than a tight end, and we saw with his production. He was a rarity. And just because you missed out on that last year, just drafting Tyler Warren doesn't mean, oh, we got the next Brock Bowers. And the thing I hate, though, is when I talk like this, people are going to say, oh, come on, Nolan, you just hate him as a prospect. I don't hate him as a prospect. Again, I will say this. I think Warren is one of the top 10 prospects in this draft. I would also argue that this is not as talented of a draft as we had last year. I look at the depth of that talent pool. It was a lot deeper than this year. This is a thinner draft. And in other drafts, I think Tyler Warren would likely be more of a late first round, maybe middle first round player than a top 10 player. Now, again, you can't pick and choose the draft classes. You can't pick and choose the prospects that are in these drafts. And I understand that. But when I look at this draft, I don't love a lot of these players. And I look at the strength of this draft, it's the depth of this draft. So when I see people saying, well, Mason Graham be great for the Jets at 7, I get it. But I also see that this is a great defensive line class where I can get a high-end starter in round 2, a good player in round 3 or 4. I just don't see that in terms of the tackle position in this draft, of me going to 42 and finding a player. Because here's the other thing. For people thinking, well, a tackle could fall to 42, that could happen. But in the round 2, I think teams are more aggressive to go and get a tackle. And if you're the Jets, we saw this happen in 2023. The Jets are picking 42. There could be a prospect they really like. There could be a tackle prospect that they have circled saying, you know what? We really like Ursary from Minnesota. We think he could be a guy that we can plug and play or maybe eventually become one of the starters on this team. We're really excited. We think he could be there. He's a great option. We really want to hope that he's there. But then you get to the draft and you're 42. Oh yeah, we're so excited. He's gonna fall to us. And then at 41, oh, hold on. There's been a trade. The team jumps the Jets. And okay. No, the tackle we wanted is gone. Oh, okay. What do we do? And I don't want that scenario again for the Jets, because if they draft Warren in the first round, or they draft Mason Graham in the first round, and it's like, okay, now we need a tackle in round 2. Other teams, there's 31 other teams. They do the recon. And if they really like offensive line prospect that fell into round 2, but they see you're there. More teams are willing to move up in round 2 because it doesn't cost as much as round 1. And they're looking at and saying, okay, we missed out on our tackle in the first round that we really wanted. We're going to make sure we're going to get the tackle here in round 2. It's all a bunch of games. And I just look, if you don't get the offensive tackle in the first round, it is going to be very difficult in round 2. So let's look at the round 2 as it sits right now. So just so I can give you an accurate picture. You have the Giants at 34, who, if they don't draft an offensive lineman, they don't have a good offensive line. I think they could go offensive line at 34. I could see Jacksonville going offensive line at 36. I could see Vegas going 37. New England has an abhorrent offensive line. In fact, if I was a betting man, and I almost would take this to the bank, I have a feeling that New England's going to be a team that's going to have 2 first-round picks. I think that they're going to, if they don't get a tackle with the 4, they're going to be a team that I could easily see getting back into the back end of the first round. Like, I would keep an eye on New England with pick 38, trying to get into the 29 to 31 range to draft a tackle. I look at Chicago. They've invested on their offensive line. I look at them. They have 39 and 41. Maybe they look at offensive line or a developmental offensive line. I just see teams also right behind the Jets that could move up. I mean, Philadelphia is fascinating. Philadelphia lost a lot of talented offensive linemen. Kansas City got burned, and they've lost offensive linemen. You can't tell me at 31 and 32 they're not looking for offensive linemen, or that they're not in the market for that. So I understand where people are saying, well, just wait till round 2. All I'm saying is, like, if I was to play the percentages and the odds, that you are more likely to find that starting caliber tight end in round 2 than you are a right tackle. Because also in round 2, I don't think it's necessarily going to be a rush on tight ends, because I think at that point, teams might be looking at quarterbacks, wide receivers. This is a really good running back class. Maybe instead they're going, well, we really, really wanted a running back in round 1, but we're going to take one here in round 2. So you have to look at how the game is basically played. And when I look at the offensive line position, yes, there are some intriguing players that could potentially be there in round 2. But I just look at the players I see for the tight end and defensive tackle room compared to the offensive line room. I'm a lot more comfortable personally investing early in the first round. Yeah, it looks like Danger Zone is wide awake. It looks like he added some Baileys this morning to be wide awake. Look at the second and third round. Multiple teams drafting rounds have OT needs. I've been saying for a week, if you don't get OT in the first round, you're going to have to trade to secure your guy. Saints, 49ers, Cowboys, Bears, Browns, etc. Even at the back end of the first round, like I like the Patriots. I really think the Patriots, I wouldn't be shocked if they go tackle at 4, but it'd be hard if Travis Hunter's there to turn that down. I think then their strategy becomes, okay, we got the great playmaker for our quarterback. Let's go and get the offensive line. We'll trade back into the first round. And I do think that there's also a big drop-off. Like, after Will Campbell and Membu, there's a drop-off. I like Josh Simmons. I like Kelvin Banks. I like Josh Connerly. And I know Connerly, someone that the Jets have had ties to. I don't think those guys make it out of the first round. So then it comes to, okay, do I like Donovan Jackson out of Ohio State? I mean, it's only appropriate because the Jets are now becoming Ohio State of the East. I mean, Irsay, if I had to go round 2, maybe because he's at 340 pounds. But, you know, you wonder, like, there's some timing consistency. Some of his technique is raw. Like, do they feel like they can get that organized early? And look, if I had to look at Irsay, I like him a lot. He's a very raw player, but do I love him at pick 42? No, and there's a chance he's not there at pick 42, because after him, there's another drop-off to Cameron Williams. Like, I just think, like, you see certain drops. I think there's a drop after Membu. Then you get into the next group, which is Simmons, Banks, and Connerly. And then I think there's a drop off to Jackson and Nursery. And with Membu, I feel a lot better where I look at the second round. There could be a good leftover of playmakers that didn't get taken in the first round. It just, to me, feels like you can get away with an offensive tackle in round 2, but then everyone's going to know. If you take care of them, you eat your vegetables and you eat your protein in the first round, then you can have a little dessert. Maybe there's a player that falls to 42. You took the offensive lineman, all the tight ends on your board you still like are there, and maybe a team gets desperate and you get some more draft capital. Like, I just look at the tight end class there. To me, like, I look at the odds that guys are there and the guys' quality that are going to be there. Like, Mason Taylor is a guy I really like. Elijah Arroyo is a guy I really like. Gunnar Helm, I think, is a guy I really like. And I understand he had the rough combine, but again, all those guys are 6'5" in that 250-pound range. And even Terrence Ferguson, he's someone that I could make the arguments there in round 3, but he's someone the Jets clearly have interested in. He has really good athleticism. And look, I think he needs to work on the blocking, but maybe you supplement him with a good blocking tight end. Don't forget, too, we also don't know what this coaching staff thinks about Jeremy Ruckert. I know they've invested in Stone, but Ruckert's a real wild card here, because as much as I think the fan base has moved off of Jeremy Ruckert or has really put Jeremy Ruckert into the long-term plans, we have to remember he's back with the quarterback he played with in college, where he had a lot of success. He has rapport with him. Maybe the Jets have a higher view of Ruckert than we do. Maybe they feel like he wasn't being utilized correct in the last system. Now, I'm not saying the Jets won't address the tight end position. I certainly think they will, but maybe it's not one of their top priorities. Maybe the Jets look at this draft as let's round out the offense and defensive lines, and what we don't get in playmakers, we'll figure out going forward, because at least we've built a strong foundation for this team. Now, I understand that there will be a polarizing response, and I almost feel like I'm earning this reputation of Mr. Tackle over tight end for Jets content creators, because last year I would get in fights about Olu on this channel all the time. And I remember coming on here after the draft, and so many people were furious that the Jets didn't draft Brock Bowers. And I get it. But here's the thing. If Olu wasn't as good as he was, the Jets would have been a lot worse trouble last year, which is terrifying to think about. I just look at the offensive line. I understand that the Jets have invested a lot of capital. Yes, they drafted Joe Tippmann in the second round. Yes, they drafted AVT years ago in the first round. Yes, they drafted Olu in the first round. And I understand that there is this fatigue, and I think Drone sums it up perfectly, that there's almost this offensive line fatigue with Jet fans. And I get that. But I just look at this team right now. To me, they want to be a power football team and run the ball down your throats. And if you want to be that type of team, you can't just have a decent O-line. You need to have a great offensive line. When the Jets were grounding and pounding under Rex Ryan, it was because they arguably had not only a great offensive line, you could make the case that in 2009 and 2010, that the Jets had the best offensive line in football, with Brick, with Faneca, with Mangold, with Moore, with Damian Woody. Like, that was an offensive line that dominated the line of scrimmage. And you look at the Lions heavily invested in the offensive line. They drafted Penei Sewell. They didn't need to draft Penei Sewell, but they did. And that has turned out to be an unbelievable investment for them. And I get that there will be a big portion of Jet fans, and I do think Drones is one of them. And I get it, but I just look at the other options. If the Jets right tackle situation right now, we're talking, like, I want to paint this picture. The Jets right tackle right now is someone that quit on their team last year, someone that had 60 starts with the Steelers, but the Steelers, who have a bad offensive line, decided to let him go. And we are one injury from Max Mitchell or Warren replacing them at tackle. And you look at the Eagles, and I think Rico brings up a great point. They go insane on how much they invest in the offensive line to the point where it drives their fans nuts. They look at their defensive line, how much high capital the Eagles have invested in the lines. But when you figure out the lines, it makes your life so much easier because then you can figure out, oh, okay, we don't need to worry about our offensive line. We can send a draft pick to get a playmaker. Oh, we can sign a playmaker. Oh, the offense is running a lot better. We don't have to be stressed all the time. It works. It just makes life so much easier. And again, I understand that the Jets' offensive line is fine right now. It's good. But if this system is going to work the way I think this coaching staff wants, it needs to be not only good, it needs to be great. And when you have a great offensive line, it makes life easier. Look at the 2009 Jets. They had a rookie quarterback. They didn't have great weapons, but you know what they could do? Run the ball down your throat. If the Jets can do that with this system, it makes life a lot easier. It makes life easier too when you have a good offensive line in front of a young quarterback. If you want to draft a future quarterback, give them protection. It's easier to find playmakers. You can find a Puka Nacua in round 6. You're not finding a Penei Sewell in round 6, most likely. The best day 3 pick I can think of was Trey Smith as a guard. And again, I was having a hemorrhage during that draft because I kept pounding the table for the Jets to draft him, But I understand that we live in a football world where we look at pass catching and we look at receiving yards and we look at touchdowns, and I get it. I understand how important playmakers are. But you can ask Chiefs fans, what's cost them 2 Super Bowls? It's been offensive line play. You look at the Eagles. Why have they been such a great franchise? It's because they've had a great offensive line. Look around the league. Outside of maybe the Bengals, what team was in the playoffs last year that had a below average offensive line or a bad offensive line? This Jet offense struggled for years, not just because of how bad the quarterback plays, but it also went to the offensive line. They couldn't run the football. So I get that you were worried about playmakers. But if this team is 4-3, 5-2 at the trade deadline, you can trade a day 3 pick and get a receiver. You can find receivers at the trade deadline. You can find tight ends at the trade deadline. You see receivers get moved all the time. Who knows? What if the Jets add Tyler Lockett in the next week? And I know he's not the most exciting receiver, but do I think Tyler Lockett is a safe number 2 receiver, or at the very, very least a high-end number 3 receiver? Absolutely. Do I think they could add Stephon Diggs? Sure. There are still receivers out there on the market that they can potentially get. And even last year, this offensive line, at the end of the season, when we finally turned to Max Mitchell, the offense couldn't function. Except in the last game where it was basically the Dolphins quit halfway through the game. And I get that you can find developmental offensive linemen rounds 3 through 5 or 6. I get that long term. But the problem is the Jets' right tackle, they don't really have a right tackle right now. If Morgan Moses was still here and you wanted to draft someone on day 3 to develop, I'd say, you know what? I'm fine with that because you have a veteran right tackle. The problem is the Jets don't have a right tackle. And I would say that if I had to list my needs right now, right tackle would probably be the biggest one for this Jet team. And I know it's not the sexy position. I know it's a position we don't want to talk about. But when you have a good offensive line in the NFL, it makes life easier. And my final point is this. We don't know what this coaching staff thinks about the current offensive lineman. I think they like Olu. I think they like Tippmann. But what's their thoughts on AVT? If they don't view AVT as a long-term answer, They could look at Membu as basically, we got our 2 corner tackles. Next year, we'll figure out guard. Maybe they take a shot later in the draft on a guard to fill in for AVT, because we don't know how this new regime views AVT. They didn't draft him. I've done this scenario, but I'll give it to you again. There's a world where if AVT gets nicked up again next year, do you really think this regime's going to want to give a 28-year-old who's missed almost 2 full seasons with Achilles injuries and now had another injury at 28? Do you really think they're going to want to give him a big contract? I don't think so. They don't have anything invested in AVT. And as much as I love AVT as a player, they have to understand the business side of it. And the Jets might look at it and go, well, we don't want to pay AVT, but we know if he hits the open market, 28-year-old guards make good money. There will be a team that could offer him 60, 70 million. And that leads to the Jets getting a 3rd or 4th round compensation pick. And I understand that that's not the sexiest argument, but the Jets might look at it and go, okay. And I already look at it too. I do think Rico's right. If they were excited about AVT, they would have locked him up. And again, I know they're working on the Sauce and Garrett. Please get those done. But you look, the guard market is huge right now. And I almost feel too like maybe the Jets, even if AVT plays great next year, even if he plays well, maybe they look at it and go, okay, he played a Pro Bowl year at 28, but do we really want to invest 4 or 5 years in a contract and a guy that's had an injury history? So I understand that you want to give yourself options. And if you bring in Membu and you have your tackle set, and he was a good tackle, and all of a sudden you say, okay, well, we got 4 of the 5 offensive linemen, we got to replace a guard. It's easier to replace a guard or find a guard in the draft or convert a tackle to a guard in the draft than it is to find a stalwart tackle. And I do think Rico brought up a great point. If they really loved AVT, I think they would have extended him already, because if you have a great offensive lineman, you don't let them leave your building. And instead, they're letting him play out this option. But I also understand the business side of it too, because Alijah Vera-Tucker, for as great as he's been and as valuable as he's been to the Jets, he's going to be 28. He has an injury history. I mean, I just look at it and he's going, and my apologies, he's going to be 26. So that's my fault. I messed up the dates. So he's going to be still 26, but you're going to look at it and go, he even this year, he missed 2 games. He got nicked up for 2 games. So he's only played a full season once. That was his rookie year. And then as a 23 and 24-year-old, he only played in 12 total games. I mean, if you're the Jets, you don't want to overpay for that. Even at 20 or 27, when he hits the market next year, I mean, if they really loved AVT, you don't think he'd be talking about like AVT? Like, it's funny. Like, we talk about Jermaine, we talk about all these extensions, and AVT is kind of the forgotten man, where you would think he would be one of the forefronts, a good mid-20s guard. But overall, though, I think that this mock draft covered a lot of bases. The Jets beefed up both sides of the ball on the offense and defensive line. They addressed a developmental quarterback need. They're able to get a receiver that brings something with a new dimension to the table. They bring in a versatile defensive back that could be a nice little chess piece. And they also bring in 2 tight ends that offer 2 different elements. You have a good pass catcher, but you also have a hammer that can help in the run game. Again, guys, let us know what you would like to see in future videos. And if you want to be on the channel, make sure to use that super chat feature so you jump to the front of the lines. And who knows, maybe the biggest donation next week will get to be a guest on the show and talk to me personally. So again, guys, if you're joining us now and you missed the start of the video, you can go back to the very beginning and see all the picks. And again, if you're joining us after the live stream and you'd want to make sure you don't miss the next one, I know, guys, hit that like and subscribe button so you don't miss any of our content. We will have a lot more mock drafts coming on Mock Draft Mondays. And who knows, maybe we'll have a full first round for all 32 teams. Maybe that could be on the menu next. So, and again, people say I hate tight ends. I had the Jets drafting 2 of them. Maybe I don't hate tight ends as much as you all think. But again, guys, thank you all for joining us. I really appreciate the love and support as always. Again, if you're new to the channel, like and subscribe so you don't miss any more great Jets content here on Rich Sports Talk. We will see you next time.